Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the third ever Intersections Science Fellow Symposium. My name is Giovanna Guerrero Medina, and I'm the Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion of the Wu Tsai Institute at Yale, Director of the Yale Ciencia Initiative at Yale School of Medicine, and it has been my honor to serve as co-chair for a second time for this important program. The Intersection Science Fellow Symposium is a postdoc organized and faculty-supported multi-institutional initiative that seeks to celebrate outstanding scientists who have demonstrated excellence in science as well as in their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in academia. The initiative provides these talented scientists with meaningful mentorship, professional development, and a community of support. And importantly, it connects them with top institutions interested in diversifying their faculty ranks. Our postdoc organizers, whom you will hear from at the end of each day, have put together an exciting program of scientific talks from our talented fellows and associates, informative panels and workshops, and fun networking sessions and inspiring keynote addresses. Today, we open the proceedings with one such inspiring talk by a person who has dedicated his career to opening doors for others in the STEM fields. Dr. Freeman Hrabowski III is President Emeritus of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which he led from 1992 to 2022. A mathematician by training, his research and publications focus on science and math education, with a special emphasis on minority participation and performance. At UMBC, he co-founded the Meyerhoff Scholarship Program, which is recognized as a national model for developing and supporting the pursuit of academic careers by students from historically excluded backgrounds. He chaired the National Academy's committee of the seminal 2011 report, Expanding Underrepresented Minority Participation, America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads. And in 2012, he was named by President Obama to chair the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. Most recently, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute launched the Freeman Hrabowski Scholars Program in his honor, and with an endowment of $1.5 billion to support outstanding early career faculty who are committed to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in science. In April 2023, the National Academy of Sciences inducted him as a member and awarded him the Public Welfare Medal, the Academy's most prestigious award for his outstanding leadership in transforming U.S. science education. For his outstanding leadership in transforming U.S. science education and increasing cultural diversity within the science workforce. Dr. Hrabowski will be interviewed by Dr. Hernandez Moura Silva, an assistant professor at MIT's Department of Biology and a 2023 Freeman Hrabowski Scholar. Dr. Moura Silva completed a master's degree in molecular biology from the University of Brasilia, a PhD in immunology from the University of Sao Paulo School of Medicine, and postdoctoral research at New York University School of Medicine. His research focuses on understanding how immune cells support normal tissue functioning through non-immune mechanisms. Dr. Hrabowski will give a few remarks before Dr. Moura Silva commences the question and answer period. He will be taking questions from the audience, so a note to trainees, start writing down your questions for Dr. Hrabowski. Dr. Hrabowski, it is a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you very, very much, Giovanni. I'm delighted to be with you. I really am. And I'm especially delighted that a Hrabowski scholar, Hernandez, will be interviewing me after I talk for a few minutes. And I'm in honor of Hernandez, who doesn't have a tie on. I don't have one on either. I'm following the Hrabowski scholar. And I'm going to be, to the postdocs, I'm going to be fairly conversational in talking with you. And I have several points to make, but I will begin with poetry. William Carlos Williams said that it's difficult to find news in poetry, and yet men, and I would say women, die miserably every day because of a lack of what's found there. And so I begin with poetry from the late Maya Angelou, who said, "Lift up your eyes upon this day, breaking for you, give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take this dream into the palms of your hands, mold it into the image of your most public self, sculpt it into the shape of your most private need. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to talk about poetry for a moment to scientists, because I want to make the point that we should all work to be balanced, to remember the ethical side, the humanistic side of what we do. And my message to you today, as we have a conversation, is that the way we think about ourselves, first as human beings, and then as scientists, as doctors, the language that we use, the way we interact with each other, the values that we hold will be so important. We become like whatever it is we really love. If we love learning, we become like that lustful learning. If we enjoy helping students or helping people to improve in their lives, that becomes the important message. And I want you to think about this, that each of us has a story, and that our stories help to define who we are. Whenever I hear people talking about my background and getting these amazing awards, I simply think about being a little kid growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, a little kid of color, a little Black kid, and having the experience to get a chance to look at my story of being a part of the civil rights movement and sitting in the back of church in the middle of the week, not wanting to be there. What kid wants to be in church in the middle of the week? And having my parents placate me with the two things I loved most: eating. I was always eating. I was a fat little kid. and I love math. By the way, I was eating M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts, you know the kind. And I was doing my math. I loved math. And I was doing my algebra. I was 12 and I skipped a couple of grades. And all of a sudden, the gentleman at the lectern said, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our young people know the difference between right and wrong. And our kids will be able to go to better schools. They meant the white schools. And all I could think about was that I was tired of those hand-me-down books we got. We only had books in our school that had been used already by white children, and they were torn up books with brown paper bags around them so they wouldn't look so bad, and we were not allowed to bring new books into the school. I wanted to see how the other kids studied, because the story that society gave Black children was that we were not as smart or as good as the white children. And I thought that smart meant you were willing to work really hard and you were excited about the work. And I didn't think anybody could work harder than I could. And I just love that math. In fact, when the teacher would give us 10 problems, I would say, give us 10 more, teacher. And the whole class would go, shut up, Freeman, shut up. I got kicked more times for mathematics. And all of my life, my passion was to get more kids loving math. And that is my story. And that story led to my believing, as I went through college and grad school and never saw anybody in grad school at Illinois, never saw a professor who looked like me, ever. In fact, never saw a tenure track woman in mathematics. The wonderful woman who was there with a PhD was not tenure track. And there were 100 faculty men, wonderful white guys, and nobody really expected me to be there. And the key is this, that all of my life, for the past 50 years, my essential question has been, what could I do to help this society believe that more young people of color, Black, Latino, others, and women, men and women and people of all backgrounds can excel in science and engineering? And what will that take? And so that's been my career's work, in fact. And if you listen to the acceptance speech from the National Academy of Sciences, if you just put in Rabowski in NAS, National Academy of Sciences, in the introduction, they talk about how I combined the math and then went to statistics and higher ed, because I was trying to figure out what role I would play. And I didn't have anybody to talk with about the group theory. I love group and ring theory, but there was nobody to talk with. Nobody would talk to me. Why is that important? For this reason. You have made it through PhD programs and postdoc programs, and you're preparing to go on the faculty, and you're trying to figure out, what do I do and how do I do this? Well, my first message to you is to believe in yourselves, to let no one else define who you are, to know that there will be people who will encourage you and other people who will look at you and you wonder, do they really think I can do this? But to remember that you may be different from other people, you may be from another country, you may have an accent, you may speak other languages, you can be from all kinds of backgrounds, and that you bring those strengths to the work. Your perspectives are different. And that's what I love about these Grabowski scholars. They come from all kinds of backgrounds, all races, LGBTQ, men and women, just wonderful backgrounds. And they bring that to the work with the idea of broadening participation in science, engineering, the life sciences for everyone. And so several messages. Number one, I want you to remember what I. Rabi said. I. Rabi was a Nobel laureate in the 40s. He grew up in New York. And he said when he was growing up, all of his friends would get home at the end of a school day, and their mothers would say, "What'd you learn in school today?" He said, "But not my Jewish mother." He said, "My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" And the practice of encouraging his curiosity made him the thinker he became. And he actually got the Nobel Prize in physics. I want you to ask good questions. That's what you've been doing, but I want you to create labs and experiences that encourage your students, that push you to continue to ask good questions, that make seeking the truth the most important part of your work. That's why you're doing what you're doing. In a society that is questioning the value, in many ways, of seeking the truth. Number two, I want you to remember Beckett, the Irish novelist who wrote in French. Some of my students know that I've been studying French. Je parle français avec mes étudiants tous les jours. I study French every day. I started studying French several years ago, il y a 4 ans, about 4 years ago, because I've worked with a number of presidents from French-speaking African countries and others. And interestingly enough, my students gave me this strange look. And I said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "Don't you think you're kind of old to be learning a language?" And that was all I needed to really get into it. And what I wanted to show them was that you can continue learning and should at any age, And I said, j'étudie le philosophe français, Monsieur Victor Hugo, Mademoiselle Simone Beauvoir. C'est très difficile, mais j'apprends beaucoup. I'm studying it all the time. I love it. And that's the point. And Beckett, who wrote, as I said, in French, had a character who studied the dancing of bees in his book, Malloy. And he said, when bees are dancing, they are actually communicating with themselves. And the point was this. He said, the more he studied the dancing of the bees, the more he began to understand how they were communicating. But the more he understood, the more he realized how much more there was to know. And there is the beginning of wisdom. That the more we understand, the more we realize we've just begun. And I know you're appreciating that as you're at this stage in your education, that we always keep learning, and that we teach others to keep learning. And so as I think about everything from the asking the questions to studying the bees, I think about my own life over this past 50 years when I've been asking, what can we do in these settings to have students excelling? And if you get a chance to look at what we did at UMBC, which is now Research One campus, to help more Black students, Latino students, students of all backgrounds to excel with the goal of of increasing the number of students of color who went on to get PhDs and MD PhDs. We're the leading producer of Black baccalaureates and who get both the PhDs, STEM PhDs and MD PhDs in the country, with others of color there too. And what's significant about that is our goal was to figure out how do we diversify the professoriate. And the challenge is this: the vast majority of students of color who go on to get PhDs do not move on to the professoriate for a number of reasons. Many, first of all, the vast majority of Americans who start in science and engineering leave it. We still call the first 2 years of science and engineering weed out courses in America. So we spend a lot of time getting more students through that process. You know, those of you who went to American universities know that many, literally 2/3 of all students of all races who start off in science and engineering don't stay there. My line is that people who start off to become engineers or scientists become great lawyers. It really does happen a lot. You get a C in chemistry, you do well in the social sciences, and you move to a profession. It happens all the time. And the more prestigious the university, the greater the chances that it will happen in those lower levels. People don't say, I didn't do well, but they didn't get that A or they got a C and they just move on to something where they did really well. And so changing the culture. If you get a chance to look at my TED Talk, it has 4 points and it talks about success in science, 4 pillars of success in science: high expectations, building community. It takes scientists or researchers to produce researchers, and then being honest about evaluation. And the point that's not so obvious about the TED Talk, though, is that when we say high expectations, it's not just about high expectations of students. It's also high expectations of professors. You know, if I go to the board and I put a problem up in differential equations and I finish it and I do this eloquent proof, it's very elegant proof, let's say, and then I give you a test on it and no one passes the test, did I teach the concept? Obviously not, but in STEM in general, we tend to think if you put it on the board, then it's the student's responsibility. We taught it, and if they didn't get it, it's their fault. Well, I would argue, and my colleagues and I at UMBC got to the point of saying, if most students are not succeeding, then there's something wrong with their teaching and learning. There's more we can do. And so the idea of high expectations is not just of students, it's of all of us. And so my challenge to you as you work to move towards the professoriate would be 2 things. One, make sure you're nurturing and supporting all to build the research on the one hand, but make sure you're thinking about your teaching to make it of significance, but also to build relationships with students, but not so much that you become their counselor. Students of color, faculty of color can very easily, and women can be so supportive of students that they're spending too much time with them on their personal challenges. My suggestion to you, and we can talk about this later, is when people start getting to know you so well because you're so kind and they have personal problems, and we all do, you want to get them to the right counselor or staff member. You're not there to be their counselor, but to have them in your labs and to inspire them and to work with them in the science. And that work is very important. And there's that subtle difference. And the same thing with community service. You want to balance it in such a way that you're not taking away the time you need to do the research so that once you are in that faculty position, as Hernandez is, and as this is a professor, that you get it done and you become tenured. That's very important. I'm often saying that to junior faculty who are trying to help students a lot. You want to do what you can in the science, but let others do the other work. And the final point I would make is this: you must believe in yourselves. There will be times when you will feel knocked down or discouraged, or the grant doesn't come through. You must get to know people in your department and others in your field. You must get advice from others. You must be with thick skin. So in the writing of proposals or when things don't go well, you can get honest feedback. You must make sure that you have people who will give you that feedback and to give you clarity in talking about what the expectations are to move to the next level and to know that you can do all of that. And so I close with the notion that for me, I could never have imagined talking to a group of postdocs and being interviewed by somebody who's got a fellowship with my name on it, like Hernandez. I mean, this is beyond what I could ever have imagined. When I marched with Dr. King as a child, 12, and went to jail and spent a week in jail, a horrible week, when I was treated not just like a slave, but like an animal, just packed with too many children, not enough restrooms, smelling for a week. I often would look out the window and think, what's my future going to be? And I was an A student, and yet I was treated like I didn't matter, it didn't exist. And yet what I was taught was to not let other people define who I am, to believe in myself, and to believe there were people of all backgrounds who would be fair if I just worked to get the knowledge. You've gotten the knowledge. You are postdocs. You're in the top 1/10 of 1% of human beings in the world when it comes to knowledge. Feel good about that. Celebrate your success. Remember to ask the good questions and never forget those B's. Keep learning every day. Thank you very much. Let's take some questions.
Okay, great. This was so inspiring, Freeman. Like, it's every time I get amazed by how your words resonate with so many things, and I think it's really it's even here where I wrote and I said this has a so big impact in our community, and I want to also ask the audience to give a round of virtual applause to
Thank you, Hernandez. And Hernandez, let me just say that when I was at MIT, I was so impressed by your students. Hernandez brought I was there to do something else, but my Rybowski scholars were there, came to visit with me, and he brought all of these wonderful students of different racial and ethnic backgrounds from all around, including some kids from Alabama who were in his lab now. And it was so impressive. It really was. I just want to give you that credit, Hernandez. Go right ahead.
Really, thank you. And I think it, just to summarize, I think for the future leaders that are soon to be here, right? I think as Freeman was summarized in the past, as also my story, I am from Brazil, came from a really poor region in Brazil. And some years ago, I never imagined to be here at MIT and even to have my last name now Roboski. So it's that is amazing. So it's a great honor for me to moderate this section, and as a recent member of the Roboski family, like hearing your words, inspiring words that is changing not now, but also the next generation of scientists is really amazing. So just for the audience, as me and Freeman discussed previously, we want this to be a really laid back and really spontaneous, organic, authentic discussion. So I would highly encourage the audience to feel free to drop your great questions and to get even more inspired by the wisdom of Dr. Roboski.
Sure.
Since I'm the moderator, I'll take the privilege to pose some of the questions. And I think you touched base in several aspects of what I'm really curious. So, and I think through history, right? I think us coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, we are always getting pushbacks, right? And I would say an example, for example, recently I was in USSF and a young female scientist saying that she feels really dissuaded to continue in the scientific track, right? So, and there is a common knowledge that they think that it's hard to believe that change will really happen, that you really foster a really inclusive environment, right? And take as an example the backlash of Supreme Court recently.
Yes, yes.
So based on your experience, Freeman, what is your advice for this audience of soon-to-be leaders to shape really the next generation of scientists and to really we move the needle forward in creating a more inclusive environment that people feel that they belong and can succeed here?
Yes, it's an excellent question. Let me start by saying that, first of all, we cannot allow ourselves to become so discouraged that we give up. That it can be, there's no doubt when we see the political climate and we see many people in power who are enacting policies or at the Supreme Court level, we see a lack of fairness. it can be so terribly, terribly discouraging. And yet, as I've said, around the country, we cannot give up. We start there. I always go back to history. We have to always remember different parts of history. When I sat watching my governor in Alabama in the early 60s tell little children who looked like me that there was no way he was going to allow them to come into the University of Alabama. He stood in the door and he said, no, absolutely not. And I remember we sat there crying, and my mother said, stop it. He said, no time to be a victim. No, we will get past this. You just get the knowledge and let's keep pushing. And she was right. She was right. She was absolutely right. Now, I tell you that for this reason, that the time will come when we will be putting more and more of this new affirmative action decision in perspective. Right now, believe it or not, the Mile program was in question just a few years ago, 20 years ago, because of another decision, the Banneker decision. They said you won't be able to do the Mile Hall because you can't use race. Well, what we use is this criterion that we use for Grabowski scholars, which says an interest in broadening participation. So you can have people of any background, but the person has to show a commitment, as you have, Hernandez, to having people of all backgrounds in your lab ready to do this work. And so there are ways. The point is, as I say to college presidents, if an institution is committed to having people of all backgrounds in a lab or on the faculty, it can be done. There's always a way to do it. If people want to use a new law to get around helping, they can. But if there's a commitment, and this is the part for all of you, when you're feeling discouraged, community. One of the points in my TED Talk is importance of community. The reason for the Grabowski scholars is so you know other people who have the same challenges you have that you can talk to. You got to have other people to talk to, not just on your campus, but around the country and beyond, where you can say, this is what I'm going through. How are you dealing with it? And you want to know people who've been through it before to say, what did you do? How did you deal with it? I can guarantee you, all of my professional life, I have been in situations when I've gone into a room, even into a math class, when everybody's looked at me as if to say, why are you here? Including the professor. I'll never forget going into algebraic topology in Illinois. Everybody in the class is a white guy. And the professor comes in and he says, this is algebraic topology, looking right at me, right? And I'm saying, and they say, yeah, this is, and he says it again. And I'm saying, I'm here, I'm supposed to be here. I get to the next class and the professor says, this is set theory. And in other words, but before he could say it, I said, this is set theory, right? To let him know I'm supposed to be here. But I had to do that. And if I hadn't had a professor from my college tell me they're going to do you like that, you've got to know you're supposed to be there, right? So when people look at you, you've got to look back in them and say, this is where I'm supposed to be. Oh yeah, oh yeah. And that's why I say in the mirror, you get up and you say, I'm supposed to be doing this. And the other point I want to make to you is this. If not you, then who? If you've made it this far, you are our best from your groups. You've got to remember that. Don't allow anybody else to make you feel ordinary. No, the academy can make people feel so ordinary. No, if you're in your spot, you are extraordinary. And you did not start on third base and walk to home run. No, no, you weren't even on the field. You had to push to get on first base. And now look at where you are. Remember that many people who are in the most advantaged situations were very privileged from the beginning. Most of us did not, and that's not to be disparaging towards them, but they did have certain advantages. Most of you did not. So remember that when you say, look how far I've come, it means you've got what it takes on the inside to go much further. That's my point.
Amazing, amazing. I will take another question for myself, and then I'll jump in the Q&A. That is bumping a lot of amazing questions here. I think that there is, you touched, I think at the one part here that I think is really important for us. Once, like when you were at Chevy Chase and HHMI, I was really inspired by the fact that you mentioned how we should learn how to talk to people with opposing views and perspectives, right?
Yes.
That that by using data and constructive thinking, we can bring them closer to embrace inclusive excellence.
Yes.
Right? So
Yeah.
what message do you have regarding the possibility of future leaders present here right now, landing in departments that are not as engaged in promoting diversity or even are against it?
Yes. Yes.
How do you see them, these leaders here,
Yes.
these new generation leaders, having a key role changing the culture in several places in this country?
It's such an important point. People always praise the MyHealth program now for being leading in the country. But what they don't know is that when we first proposed it, some of my most prestigious scientists wrote me 2- and 3-page letters. At that time, we were back in the late 80s, we were still using typewriters, if you all know what a typewriter is. and I mean, single space typewriters, letters, 2 pages saying how unfair it was to have something for people of color. And my first reaction was to get really angry when we'd gotten, and they didn't want me to take the money that Bob Malhoff was going to give. They just thought it was not fair. And then what I said was, show me at the graduation. I said, I had to really calm down. There's a saying that I was taught that's from the Greeks. It says, those the gods wish to destroy, they first make angry. I want you to think about that. Those the gods wish to destroy, they first make angry. Anytime somebody makes you angry, don't respond. Don't respond. Don't write anything. Don't ever write something out of anger and send it, because you'll regret it later. And don't even speak. Breathe deeply and say, let me think about it. Okay. And I had to do that because I was so upset. We'd found this money. We were going to help these kids out. And people are saying, no, you can't do that. Don't take the money. All right. And had to think through, without anger, how to convince people who thought very differently that it was worthwhile helping these students of color. And because they were saying, well, we're fair, everybody should just have the same chance. And I said, find me one Black, for example, graduating who's earned an A in one upper level science course. We had none on my campus, none, and I said, do you think they're just not able to do it? And they said, no, it'll take another generation. And I said, I thought you all were scientists. And they said, what do you mean? I said, what experiment have you done? How do you know it's going to take one other generation? What's your basis of proof? If you're a scientist, or is it just based on, you're just guessing that, right? And it was just through my challenging them as scientists that I said, we don't know what's possible. Let's experiment. Let's use this as an experiment to see if we can show that students of color, Blacks and others, can excel in science if we do certain things. And if it works, we will learn things that will help other students, our white students too, because many of them are not doing well either. You've got some doing well, but there are many who are not. And they allowed me to do that. They allowed us to do that. And that's when we learn things. So the point is, as people are not as encouraged or as supportive, rather than making them enemies, give yourself time to get to know them and to see how you can say something that might get them to at least open their minds, and to see how inclusion can give you a stronger set of approaches to solving different problems. That would be my advice. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So now it's popping so many amazing questions here, but I have one here from a former Merhoff scholar from 19, Lydia Germay. So she is asking you, what do you think are some challenges this next generation of leaders will face as incoming faculty? As a group committed to shape academic culture and supporting marginalized students, what are the challenges that you think that you face in these years to come?
And every Malhoff scholar knows that I consider them all my sons and daughters. And now we got the Rabowski scholars added to that group. Every Malhoff, I appreciate hearing from them. I would say this, that right now, everybody's really sensitive about anything involving DEI. In fact, I'm in some states where people with those titles even in their names are losing their jobs, or the titles are being changed. And I'm having to recommend how to change things. Let me just give you one example. I've recommended in some states that we go to the word inclusion, all right? Just to get legislators to not take jobs away from people and to continue to talk about people of color, LGBTQ, and everybody else. I mean, because we are really in sensitive times. But for new leaders, the challenge would be to be as creative as possible to show that we've got to help all these students of all races, including students of color and poor white kids and first generation college and LGBTQ, all these groups. We've got to keep including people. So I'm not changing the groups. I'm trying to get conservatives to understand we can't leave people behind. And we've got to just find a way to pull people into that idea of inclusion. That's the part. People can't fight me on that. You see what I'm saying? They can say, if you say diversity, then you're leaving the white kids behind. That's the problem, you see. But the whole matter was not about leaving them behind anyway, but inclusion is a word I'm getting people to push on. Now, that's the first point. But the second point, because it's an excellent question, is that we need tough conversations on campuses. Now, Emily Dickinson, my mother was an English and math teacher, so I was always learning this poetry and stuff, said, tell the truth, but tell it slant. Tell it slant. Hernandez, if I say to somebody, you really suck at that, they may get really defensive and fight me the whole way. But if I plant a seed and I say, for example, you think we might be better in the department in this way? For example, I was director on our advanced program grant. That's the advanced grant from the National Science Foundation was to increase the number of women faculty in science. Started at MIT because there was such a disparity between how women were treated for faculty positions and men in startup packages and everything. And so when I said, when we were writing the grant, let me be the PI and I'll have several women chairs as co-PI, they said, why would you do it? I said, because men should be as concerned about the paucity of women in science and engineering as whites should be about the paucity of people of color in those areas. These are human issues, right? And what we learned was that sometimes to get my senior male people faculty members to not be so upset was to say, can we talk about this? Rather than just saying, you guys are completely off. Rather than just pushing people to get super defensive and fight from the beginning, got to ask a question to begin the conversation rather than having people fight you the whole way. And you don't make all the progress in 1 year. No, it takes time. It took the first 3 or 4 years for my Mile House on the first 3 or 4 years it took to show just how important the Mile program could be to students of all types on our campus. But after that, some of those same men who had fought the beginning of the Mile High program with those letters began coming to help recruit for the Mile High program. But it took changing their attitudes. And that's about culture change. And that's the point I would make. If you look at my latest book that came out a couple of years ago, The Empowered University, the theme in there is about culture change and inclusive excellence, changing attitudes of people, which is about the psychology of behavior. And that's what we have to, and that's what new leaders have to work on with people. And some people can change, they really can. Yeah. Great question, Maha.
So now I have a question here from Corey White that I'll blend with one of my questions, actually, that is the same question. I think you touched the bases and you always tell to underrepresented faculty and soon to be leaders, focus, right? And it's pretty common that faculty from disadvantaged backgrounds have to pay the diversity tax, right? That we are constantly requested to provide service in the academia while other members of the community are just focused on their research program, right? On the flip side, representation is fundamental for the next generation of scientists, right? We need to inspire and be role models for the next generation. What is your advice to the community to help navigate the need to focus on establishing an impactful research program and at the same time be present to build community, especially for the junior investigators that are concerned about tenure, right?
Excellent point. I use the advanced model, the advanced model for women in talking about what we have to do for faculty of color. And it's this, what we have said for women is, first of all, every faculty member of color needs a mentor or a champion in that department who will give that person advice. Because every time you're asked to do something, you don't have to say yes, number one. And number two, you can't be Mikey. You know, I don't know whether you're old enough. There was a commercial that's no. There was a commercial involving little brothers and sisters at a table eating. And when they didn't want the food, they'd give it to Mikey. He was a little kid. And they just give it to Mikey, and Mikey would eat it, right? So Mikey was the one that gave it to, nobody else was able to keep giving it to Mikey. You can't be Mikey. No. Well, every time there's a woman's issue or when there's a minority issue, no. You gotta ask the question now, what's the balance here? One of the reasons that I wanted some Malhus to be white and some Grabowski scholars to be white is that all the issues involving inclusion and diversity shouldn't be handled simply by people of color. We want people of all races who become experts on issues of inclusion. And Hernandez will tell you that about half of the Grabowski scholars are not people of color. They're women, and so they are becoming experts also. Malhus will tell you, they are, so you want, it just can't be that the challenge of issues of color and race are addressed only by that group. We don't have enough professors from that group, any of those groups anyway. You gotta have other people who are Mike Summers at UMBC. There are all kinds of wonderful white professors who are concerned about these issues and learn about these issues. That's number one. Number two is this. You need to have clear expectations. I say this in the TED Talk from people about how much research is expected, understanding in terms of levels of journals, getting a sense of what's been required before for people to move to the next level for your 3-year review, for tenure, but also how much service and how much in the teaching, how much and the kinds of evaluation. You want as much of clarity in expectations as possible with the research, because all of you as postdocs are probably going to places that are requiring a lot of research. And that must be, that's seeking the truth, that research is first. But you need people who can help you with the grant writing. I know that for the Grabowski scholars, there's that emphasis on that community that helps you in the grant writing to make sure you get the level of grants you need, whether it's NIH, NSF, or whatever. And let me just tell you, I should have said this. Sometimes we've been so hard working on our own, we don't realize how important it is to have this network of people who support you. I've had a number of Malhus who were really good, who were a little stubborn at first about not getting enough help. You gotta get a lot of help. You gotta say, I need help. I need more help from the department, from faculty, from somebody in my particular specialty who's not on the campus, for example. Who are the people who can help me to get this grant and whatever, or whether it's about seminars for proposal writing, all those things. But you cannot be the one to pay the diversity tax alone. No. And you want to have a sincere conversation with people. What I would say to you is, though, remain calm in having it. There's a way to say no and smile, all right? I had to learn that because in my young years, I had a big afro and I could seem like the angry black man. For years, I had to tell people, I'm not the angry black man, but I am gonna tell you the real deal. And I'd laugh, right? So you wanna find an approach of saying, no, I need to understand now how I balance all of this, and keep my health. That's the other thing I didn't say to you. You gotta keep your health. You can try to do everything for everybody and get sick. No, nothing is more important than your health. Don't let the stress get to you. I had that problem in my early years, even when I was doing a combination of my research and a lot of administrative stuff. It was too much, it really was. In fact, believe it or not, I had doctors telling me I'd have my first heart attack in my 30s. I had to really work on my health and in balancing it all. And now, think about it, because I've been doing this for longer than, I've been doing all of this for 50 years, all right? And so now, let me just say, on a personal level, and that's why I wanted to give you the real deal. Jackie and I do Tai Chi, and we do acupuncture, and meditation and prayer, right? And eat well and my exercise, all those things are important. People don't tell you that, but your health, emotional, psychological, and physical health are really important, and strategies for balancing it all. And your point about the diversity tax, having the conversation with people. Where do I fit in this? And in your first year or two, you know, whether it's about students or people wanting you on committees, you can't be serving on everything because they will make you feel wonderful serving in all these committees. But if you haven't gotten the research done, they will say you did a great job and bye. All right, you do not, and you tell students, no, if I help you all that much, I won't be here for you later. No, let me get you to a counselor. Love you dearly, but I'm not trained as a counselor, but I will help you by getting you somebody. You can be in my lab working, right? So balance, teach, and the younger you are, usually the less experience you've had in figuring out that balance. So let people who with more experience help you in figuring out the balance. Tell them what you're trying to juggle so you can think through the balancing of all those things. Long answer, but you can, okay?
It resonates a lot. I think from the aspect of like since I landed, people were requesting over, and you have to say, wait, no, because my research program will not move forward.
Yeah.
But also being resourceful, right? As you mentioned, you have to be shameless. And I said, like, as you said, ask help for writing your grants, everything. Like, I think like I am not a Freeman now if I was not shameless, asking everyone in this campus said, help me. And
yeah. It's true. Because when I was in that first master's program in abstract algebra, I mean, believe me, and none of the guys, white guys, wanted to work with me. I'd go to the professor, and he'd say, well, just work with the guys. I would say, they won't work with me. I need you to help me out. And I ended up getting higher grades than they did because they wouldn't go to the professor. They thought you were kind of slow if you went to the professor. I would say, I don't get it. And I'm young. I mean, they're much older than I am. I'm not stupid, but I don't get it. No, I would, you know, so I'm saying, be shameless. Yeah.
I have one question here from Kineri. I think, sorry if I pronounced it wrong, Kineri Iveka. So in our capacity as future leaders in science, wait, sorry, it just moved here. Someone voted in my list. Where is it? Oh my God, it just appeared. Let me see if it's, I'm sorry, for some reason it's appeared from my. So the question is regarding like how we can motivate more students from the bottom line, right? Like high school students.
Yeah.
From disadvantaged backgrounds that are really excited, but they feel like they don't belong there. They feel that scientist is not my path, that awards, I cannot see me getting awards. Yeah. So how we in our capacity as mentors in academia can bring the communicate more effectively that science is a path to the lay audience that don't understand that, and motivate these young and brilliant people of color and diverse backgrounds early on to see that that is a great path to go and try.
So it's a great question. So let me give you the broad answer. So when I chaired the National Academies Committee on Underrepresentation in Science, the name of the report is Expanding Representation. It's at the Crossroads. It's called the Crossroads Report. It was done a little over 10 years ago. If you look up Rubowski and National Academy of Sciences, it was back in 2011, 2012. First of all, the biggest drop in minority sciences actually occurs in the first 2 years of college. Most people who start off in science, I can't say this enough, who really, I mean, even the students who get, Black, Latino, a number of Asian kids, believe it or not, only 20% of Black and Latino students who start off in math and science or engineering in college actually graduate with a bachelor's in those areas, only 20%. And for whites, it's only 32%. And for Asians, it's only 41%. So you got hundreds of, large numbers of students who, from all kinds of backgrounds, who start off in those areas and they get wiped out in the first 2 years. So you start there. Those are kids who are, in many cases, fairly well prepared. And that's in the best of universities to community colleges, and they don't make it. So I'm saying that's the low-hanging fruit. You start there. Now, that doesn't mean we don't want to work with other kids, but I'm just saying even they don't make it if they, the two things I would suggest that one is because you're so rare and because people would have you coming out speaking all the time and you don't have the time, the one thing I would suggest, two things. One, I do want you to think about how can I make a presentation about my work and my own life's journey in such a way that a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old or an 8-year-old can understand what I'm saying. I mean, one of the problems with scientists is people think of old white men who talk in a way that nobody understands. So you want to make sure you can explain a concept in a way that a child could understand the significance of what you're doing. This is one of the challenges in science, for us to help the public, whether somebody is a congressman or a high school student. That's number one. But number two, I don't want you going out a lot into the communities and everything right now. Right now, you need to be doing your work. But if you decided to do one a year and have it video recorded, then they can use the recording. You see what I'm saying? You have to make it clear, because if you go out and you're good, they'll want you to come every week. You don't have time for that. This is what I mean, because you can say, oh, but I need to help these students. No. You cannot do it right now. No. So doing something once and have it recording and telling people, you can see this recording of me, or or something on social media that shows it. That's a good idea. This is what I've done with a number of my students who are now famous scientists. Get a recording that they can use, okay? And that makes a difference. If you haven't seen it, one of the Rabowski scholars is my student who was the leader with that NIH Moderna vaccine, Kismikia, another Rabowski scholar who's there at Harvard, Kismikia Corbett. She's done recordings, and she's the first Black woman to lead a team to get that vaccine. So it's a good story. And for a lot of little girls of color, it's great for them to look at one of those recordings. And so I would say doing it that way to show what's possible. You will have opportunities to help more children and young people, but there are many levels, from helping the kids to helping the teachers. Teachers, let me tell you, but you got time to do all that. Right now, until you become tenured, you want to do a limited amount of that. You really do. Once you become tenured, you can have grants where you can have, teachers in your lab in the summer, or kids, high school kids in your lab in the summertime. You can do all those, think long-term. Remember, this is a journey. You'll have a chance to do all of that and to get into some grants to bring K through 12 stuff into it. But right now, the challenge you have is that all of you are so good and you can do so many things, you can go into too many directions too quickly. I want you to have that passion for helping the community and others, but right now, you've got to help yourself. That's what, if this may sound really selfish, to say it this way, but I'm saying right now, you got to protect yourself so you can help everybody else 10 years from now. You got to get the power. The power comes with tenure. It just does. It does. You got to make sure, and I've had to say that to some young faculty, and they've said, but you don't care about yes, I do. But I had to make sure people get that security so they can, for the long haul, help people. Remember that, folks. You're working for the long haul, not just for the next 3 or 4 years. You're talking about your career, because you want to show, by paying it forward, you want to show younger scientists what's possible. That's what you're doing. You're showing younger scientists that they can do it first, okay? And then you'll bring them along and you'll bring the next group along. Because when you think about the professoriate, that's going to allow you to think about grad students, postdocs, grad students, undergrad, K through 12, and the community. Get that vision of all of those. The Rabowski Scholars, for me, that program is like a dream come true, because I always wanted to work on the Mauhof for undergrad, you see, to get more students who could move on to grad school. Then we have a grad Mauhof. And then the point I kept making is, but so few of the professors at research campuses and others are people of color. Rabowski Scholars is that. And there are some national agency programs, but I think that Rabowski Scholars is going to show other foundations that it's possible. That's the point, because even though it's $1.5 billion, that's a drop in the bucket for what we need from the country. You get my point? But it can show it, just as your postdocs, this program can show what's possible to change the culture. What you all are doing with this program there is helping to change the culture of science through your example. And each of you, I want you to think about this, each of you will have the opportunity, once you are tenured faculty, to have your own program at your university, you see? And to do this, think that way. It's that multiplier effect. Think about that, okay?
Oh my God, like this conversation is flying and I could be here another hour, but.
And I'm gonna shorten my answers. I'll shorten my answer. I get started. I'm sorry.
I think we have to finish off because it's about the hour, but I would like to shout a huge thanks, not only in my behalf, also in the Montgomery, born and raised, my student right here, just here for you.
I remember. I was bragging on her. Tell her I was talking to people in Alabama who know her family. Yeah.
To all the community of the Intersection Fellows for such inspiring words, it was a tremendous pleasure. And I'm looking forward to see you again. And I look forward that this community of the Intersection and Science Fellows be really inspired by this and go out there and spread the love, spread the message, and reshape the culture in science in this country. So that I think I'll pass to Giovanna to end the
Hernandez, let me quickly say, I want everybody to look at some of my videos, but the thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Make sure they learn that. If they look at my acceptance speech and my TED Talk, you hear it on both. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Be encouraged, be inspired. You represent our best. I am so inspired by all of you. Thank you, Hernandez.
Giovanna.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, what a fantastic keynote and what a way to start this intersection symposium. Thank you so much, Dr. Rabowski. You're a natural mentor. Thank you, Dr. Moura Silva. It was great to have your insights as well and your experiences and your candid questions. This concludes our keynote address. So thank you, everybody. Now, to officially open the symposium, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Darren Lattimore, who is Yale School of Medicine's first Deputy Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and its first Chief Diversity Officer. Dean Lattimore is responsible for developing and implementing a comprehensive strategy for furthering diversity, equity, and inclusion at Yale School of Medicine, and this includes a focus on recruitment and retention of faculty and students from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented in science and medicine. He has served as senior advisor for the Intersection Science Fellow Symposium and a champion for the effort since its beginnings. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lattimore. Welcome, Darren.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the third Intersection Science Fellows Symposium. I'm sorry, I'm going to start over because I can't tell if you can hear me or not. Welcome, everyone, to the third Intersection Science Fellows Symposium, which we affectionately call ISFS. This symposium could not have occurred without collaboration in every sense of the word. 19 different institutions and over 150 volunteers stepped up to do the heavy lifting needed to bring this program to fruition and to develop the year-long professional development curriculum for the fellows. It truly warms my heart to know that so many were willing to help. Congratulations to the 26 fellows and 21 associates whose science we will have the fortune of hearing throughout the program. However, I also want to acknowledge all 26 applicants. Each and every one of you are incredible scientists. You made it extremely hard to do the selection. ISFS epitomizes the intersection of incredible science and inclusive excellence by bringing together multiple intersecting identities, from diversity of institutions touched, to diversity of scientific fields, to gender and racial diversity, And equally important, and I hope that you notice, diversity of approaches to solving the important questions of today and tomorrow. I want to end by thanking the postdocs who spent countless hours organizing this program and the faculty who supported them in the effort. I also want to thank Chelsea Gomez, the Yale School of Medicine's Office DEI Program Manager. She did incredible magic behind the scenes. And then lastly, I want to thank our two co-chairs. You've heard from Dr. Giovanna Guerrero Medina. She is the Director of DEI for the Wu Tsai Institute and the Director of Yale Ciencia. And I also want to thank Aaron Heckler, Dr. Aaron Heckler, Associate Provost for Postdoctoral Affairs. Again, welcome to the symposium. I hope you both enjoy and learn a lot. Giovanna, I hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Darren. Okay, so we also have welcoming remarks from the Jean and David W. Wallace of the Yale School of Medicine, and Dean Nancy Brown. She is also the CNH Long Professor of Internal Medicine at our school. She regrets that she's not able to give her remarks live. She's currently in Germany, and she instead has sent a video to welcome and congratulate all of our fellows and associates. A graduate of the Yale College and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Brown has led a translational research program that focuses on developing new pharmacological strategies to prevent vascular disease in patients with high blood pressure and diabetes. Dr. Brown is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a member of the American Society for Clinical Investigation, the American Association of Physicians, the National Academy of Medicine, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So I hope we have our video queued up, and I would like to welcome Dean Brown's remarks.
Welcome to the third Intersections Science Fellow Symposium. Among us today are 26 ISFS Fellows and 21 Associates who were selected from among 261 applicants. You are a diverse group, with 70% of you coming from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented, and 60% of you are women. Over the next few days, you will hear more about their work representing fields like neuroscience, cancer biology, immunology, cell and developmental biology, physiology, genetics, and public health. My Yale colleagues and I are particularly proud of this symposium, which originated at our university in collaboration with 19 institutional partners and through the contributions of more than 150 volunteer postdocs and faculty members from across the United States. This symposium provides meaningful mentorship, professional development,
My apologies, everyone. We're going to try playing the film again. So just give us one moment and we will start fresh.
Welcome to the third Intersections Science Fellow Symposium. Among us today are 26 ISFS Fellows and 21 Associates who were selected from among 261 applicants. You are a diverse group, with 70% of you coming from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented, and 60% of you are women. Over the next few days, you will hear more about their work representing fields like neuroscience, cancer biology, immunology, cell and developmental biology, physiology, genetics, and public health. My Yale colleagues and I are particularly proud of this symposium, which originated at our university in collaboration with 19 institutional partners and through the contributions of more than 150 volunteer postdocs and faculty members from across the United States. This symposium provides meaningful mentorship, professional development, and a community of support to outstanding scientists, and connects you with top institutions interested in hiring future faculty and in diversifying their faculty recruitment processes. Today, more than 80% of symposium alumni have secured faculty positions, including 3 who are with us here at Yale School of Medicine. 3 are also Howard Hughes Medical Institute's Habrowski Scholars. I want to thank the hundreds of volunteers and postdoc organizers who have dedicated countless hours to supporting this effort, as well as our institutional partners, the ISFS Advisory Committee, and my Yale School of Medicine colleagues, co-chairs Dr. Erin Heckler, Associate Provost for Postdoctoral Affairs, and Dr. Giovanna Guerrero Medina, Director of DEI of the Wu Tsai Institute and Director of the Yale Ciencia Initiative, ISFS Senior Advisor, Dr. Darren Lattimore, Deputy Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and ISFS Fellow Selection Advisor, Dr. Faye Rogers, Associate Director of Therapeutic Radiology. We also received expert support in coordinating the event by Chelsea Gomez, DEI Program Manager at Yale School of Medicine. I'm so grateful to each of you for your contributions. With that, please enjoy the presentations and join me in congratulating this year's Fellows and Associates.
Wonderful. Thank you to Dean Brown for sharing those remarks. We have a few minutes until our next session, which will start at 11:15. We will start with our exciting talks from our Intersection Science Fellows. The topic of the next session will be aging, and you can see our speakers in the slide there. Before we get started, I just want to go over the proceedings for today, for those of you who will be able to join us. After the first session from the fellows on aging, we will have 2 different concurrent sessions. One will be a private session for the fellows only, where they will get to connect and converse with chairs, deans, and other representatives from some of our partner institutions, which have active faculty job searches. So that'll be a chance for them to talk a little bit about, for the fellows to talk about their research interests, and for our institutional representatives to talk about their faculty searches. At the same time, from 12:45 to 2 p.m., there will be an open session for all attendees to hear flash talks from our Intersections associates. Our associates are outstanding scientists who garnered an honorable mention in our selection process. They will be providing 5-minute flash talks. They're pre-recorded, but the associates will be on hand to answer any questions that the public might have. So I encourage everybody to look at our program, which is on the attendee hub, as well as on our website, and look at the titles and the abstracts from our associates who will be presenting today. There will be a second session for the rest of us, our associates, tomorrow. Then after a break in the afternoon, we will have a panel on strategies to ace the job market. I believe this panel is public, So other trainees are welcome to join and hear from our wonderful panelists who are young professionals, young faculty members at various universities. Then in the afternoon, we will have our second session of fellow science talks, and this one will be focused on brain and behavior. Finally, we will have the co-chair closing. So our program planning committee co-chairs will Dr. Sohini Banerjee and Dr. Michael Kitaoka will give their remarks and their thanks for all the volunteers that helped put this program together. And for those of you who are postdoctoral volunteers for ISFS, for our fellows and associates, we will also have a final session in the afternoon from 5:30 to 6:30 Eastern Time, a workshop on organizing your job search process. This is a private session that is only available to our fellows and associates, and of course to all the postdoc volunteers who have helped put this together. So we're very excited for the rest of the day and the rest of the sessions. I encourage everybody to go on the attendee hub and look at the sessions, find those of them that are of interest to you, add them to your calendar. You can also connect with other attendees through the attendee hub. So if there's any fellows or associates that you want to connect with, particularly for our institutional partners, you can chat with them live. You can also send them messages through the platform. And for everybody that's attending, we also have virtual booths for our partner institutions. If you navigate to that section, you will be able to see different materials that our institutional partners have shared, particularly some of the job searches that they have ongoing. In some of the cases, they have virtual booth hours. So you can actually log on to the website and hop on a Zoom session with institutional representatives to talk a little bit more about their job searches and other opportunities they might have. So if you're on the job market or just want to network, I encourage you to make use of that. Some virtual booths don't have Zoom sessions, but I do encourage you to use the contact button to send them messages of inquiry and maybe find a time to connect offline. Okay, so I think we are getting ready for our next session. I will now pass the virtual mic to the moderators for our first session of Fellows Research Talks. Again, the topic is on aging, and you can see our illustrious speakers there. Our moderators for this session are Dr. Jennifer Sun and Dr. Aman Kumar. Please take it away.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to our first Fellows Research Talk session, Focus on Aging. My name is Jennifer Sun. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in the Bridge to Tenure Track Faculty Program at Rutgers University. I will be moderating this session along with my colleague, Dr. Aman Kumar, a postdoctoral associate at Yale University. We're pleased to be here today to celebrate the groundbreaking research of our fellows. Each fellow's presentation will be 15 minutes, followed by 5 minutes for Q&A. Fellows will be notified by private message when there are 2 minutes remaining for their talk, and the moderators will turn on their videos and give a verbal remark when the 15 minutes have concluded. At any time during their talks, please post your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. Since time is limited, it is likely we won't be able to get to everyone, so please try to keep your questions succinct. The moderators may paraphrase and/or combine your questions if we observe a theme. So without further ado, let us give our attention to our fellows. Up first, we have Chineri Iwika from Stanford University, who will be talking to us about circadian regulation of immune function in aging and disease.
Okay. Thank you everyone for taking the time to be here today. I'd really like to thank the Intersection Science Fellows Committee for giving me the opportunity to present my work here. So the title of my talk is Circadian Regulation of Immune Function in Aging and Disease. My research goal is to investigate the intersection between circadian biology, metabolism, and immune function to study aging and age-related diseases. An example of an age-related disease that I am interested in is stroke. So what is a stroke? A stroke occurs due to a blockade of cerebral arteries, preventing oxygen and nutrient supply to the neurons. And then these dead and dying neurons release these danger-associated molecular patterns through the compromised blood-brain barrier into the systemic circulation. At the same time, the sympathetic nervous system becomes activated, and this will cause the gut to release these pathogen-associated molecular patterns. Together, the DAMPs and the PAMPs will activate the innate immune cells. These are the first responders to injury. These include the monocytes and the neutrophils that are released from the bone marrow and the spleen. These cells then traverse into the brain parenchyma, where the monocytes differentiate into macrophages. But instead of a resolution, these cells initially release a cytokine storm, an amplified inflammatory response that further exacerbates the stroke injury. So my question is, why and how do innate immune cells contribute to stroke injury in aged individuals? Well, in order to mount a healthy immune response, a homeostatic metabolism is required. Think of all the things immune cells have to do in response to injury. They have to proliferate, they have to migrate, they have to increase in their expression of inflammatory molecules, and all of this requires energy. However, this metabolic homeostasis is impaired with aging. And several studies have established that many metabolic pathways, including mitochondrial function, is impaired with aging. So how is metabolism regulated? Well, we know that metabolism is regulated by the circadian clock. Shown here in this illustration are the circadian clock machinery regulating levels of NAMT, which is a rate-limiting enzyme for the energy critical cofactor, NAD. In this study by Peak in 2013, they showed that NAD levels are rhythmically regulated within a 24-hour period in liver. And this study by Lamia in 2008 showed that many metabolic genes exhibit rhythmicity in their expression. And when you delete one of the circadian clock proteins, BMAL, you have significantly abolished this metabolic rhythmicity and even reduced expression of many of these metabolic genes. There's also circadian regulation of immune cell numbers. In this study by Nguyen in 2013, they showed that Ly6 high monocytes, which are pro-inflammatory from the blood and the spleen, exhibit rhythmicity in their numbers. This is in anticipation of immune challenges throughout a 24-hour period. So there are well-established studies that show circadian regulation of metabolism in some cells and immune cell numbers. So what is the circadian clock? Well, the circadian clock functions to allow the temporal coordination of all physiological processes within an organism and its external environment. Shown here is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a master oscillator, and it is entrained by these time cues, which include the light-dark cycles, feeding schedules, and activity. And it synchronizes this with the clocks in the different brain regions, as well as the clocks in the different peripheral organs. This way, all of your organs are working in concert to anticipate changes in the environment. While there's organ-level synchronicity, there's also cell-autonomous circadian regulation, where 15% of all genes are directly regulated by the BMAL and clock and circadian clock machinery, and 65% indirectly. The circadian clock is disrupted with aging. Shown here in this study by Sandria and Layton in 2021, they showed that NAD levels which exhibit rhythmicity in the young, as shown here in the blue trace, is diminished and abolished completely in aged individuals. Disruption of the circadian clock has also been linked to several diseases. You can disrupt the circadian clock by social jet lag or shift work, where the times you're working days and nights are constantly changing. And this has been linked to increased stroke incidence, as shown in this study in 2009 of nurses that do shift work. So in summary, we know that aging is a certain risk factor for many diseases, including stroke. With aging, immune function and metabolism are impaired. Immune function and metabolism are regulated by the circadian clock. With aging, the circadian clock is disrupted, and a disrupted clock increases the risk for stroke. So this led to 3 research questions. The first is, are there age-dependent changes in the metabolism of innate immune cells in response to stroke injury? The second is, what specific metabolic pathways are impacted in innate immune cells in response to stroke injury? And the third is, what is the effect of circadian clock disruption on the innate immune cell metabolism? So to address the first question, I subjected young mice, which were 3 to 6 months old, and age mice, which were 18 to 20 months old, to stroke. I collected the blood monocytes. These are the cells that will traverse into the brain parenchyma to differentiate into macrophages. I collected them at 3 different time points, 4.5, 24, and 72 hours. This is in order to measure acute metabolic changes. And then I subjected these cells to a mitochondrial stress test. So with this test, you can use an inhibitor such as oligomycin to inhibit the ATP synthase, FCCP to disrupt the mitochondrial membrane permeability, and rotentin and entomycin to inhibit complex 1 and 3 of the electron transport chain. And you can use this to measure parameters such as oxygen consumption rates, basal respiration, ATP production, as well as glycolysis. So at 4.5 hours after stroke, you can see that the oxygen consumption rates of the blood monocytes from the young stroke mice are not different from the control sham. However, in the age, you can see that the oxygen consumption rates of the blood monocytes from the age stroke mice, shown here in red, is significantly higher compared to sham. By 24 hours after stroke, now you begin to see a metabolic response of these blood monocytes in terms of their oxygen consumption rates, where it's significantly reduced compared to sham. And in the age where previously increased, it is now significantly reduced, indicating metabolic exhaustion. And by 72 hours after stroke, where the young have rebounded to sham levels, in the age, they remain metabolically depleted. So altogether, these results suggest that age is a factor in the metabolic response to stroke. So the second question is, what specific metabolic pathways are impacted in innate immune cells in response to stroke injury? To answer this question, I subjected young and aged mice again to stroke, collected the blood monocytes, and this time performed an untargeted metabolomics. So I identified many metabolites, and I performed an enrichment pathway analysis where yellow is increase in stroke, blue is decrease in stroke, and dark yellow is no change between stroke and sham. You can compare young and aged mice at the different time points. What I've highlighted in red are metabolic pathways that are changed in the young and in the aged, though not in the same direction. But what stood out to me amongst all of these pathways was the NAD metabolome. And this is because it's changed in the age and not in the old. It is implicated in many of these metabolic pathways. It declines with aging, and it is regulated by the circadian clock. So a little bit about NAD. NAD synthesized through 3 different pathways. First, the Price handler pathway through nicotinic acid, the salvage pathway through the NAD consuming enzymes, and through the de novo biosynthetic pathway, also known as the kynurenine pathway through tryptophan. This pathway became interesting to me because of this study by Darlington in 2011, where they showed that looking at the kynurenine to tryptophan ratio, which is an indicator of activation of this pathway, that it was significantly higher in stroke patients compared to controls shown here in the dark triangles. And it was even more upregulated in stroke patients that died. What is also interesting about this pathway is that one of its metabolites, chloronic acid, which is converted to nicotinic acid mononucleotide, an NAD precursor, is a neurotoxin that induces excitotoxicity in neurons. And no one has investigated this in blood monocytes in the context of stroke. So to investigate further, I subjected young and aged mice again to stroke, collected the blood monocytes at the same time points, and this time performed a targeted metabolomics. So at 4.5 hours after stroke, chloronic acid levels in the blood monocytes of the young stroke mice is significantly high. In the age, it is upregulated but did not reach significance. By 24 hours after stroke, chloronic acid level increases persist in the young, and in the age, it is now significantly upregulated. And by 72 hours after stroke, while the young have rebounded to sham levels, in the age, these levels remain elevated. For NAD levels, there's no change between stroke and sham in the young. However, in the age, you can see the significant increase in NAD levels. By 24 hours after stroke, you now begin to see a significant increase in NAD levels in the young, whereas in the age where previously increased is now significantly decreased, indicating depletion. And by 72 hours after stroke, for both young and aged mice, there's no difference between stroke and sham. So in summary, these results show that there are age-related changes in NAD levels in blood monocytes after stroke, and these cells are producing a neurotoxic molecule, chloronic acid, before even entering into the brain. So the third question is, what is the effect of circadian clock disruption on the innate immune cell metabolism? And so to answer this question, I am using two different models. The first is a genetic disruption of the circadian clock by deleting BMAL, the clock protein, specifically in myeloid lineage cells. So these include the monocytes, macrophages, neutrophils, and microglia. And I did this by crossing BMAL flux with CD11B3. The second is a whole body circadian disruption, where I've chronically jet lagged the mice by phase advancing the light dark cycle by 6 hours every 2 days for 4 weeks. I collected blood monocytes and macrophages from young and aged mice and subjected them to a mitochondrial stress test. So in our conditional knockout shown here in blue compared to our wild type in green, you can see that for the oxygen consumption rates in macrophages from young, there are no differences. However, in the age, you can see the significant reduction, indicating that BMAL has an age-related effect on the metabolism of macrophages. In our chronic jet lag model, you can see here that the oxygen consumption rates of the blood monocytes from the young mice is significantly higher compared to control, shown here in red compared to blue. We see a similar increase in the oxygen consumption rates of the blood monocytes from the aged mice. So these results indicate that disruption of the circadian clock by chronic jet lag has an impact on the metabolism of blood monocytes. So in summary, I've shown you that age is a factor in the immune metabolic response to stroke, and that there are age-dependent changes in NAD levels after stroke. Immune cells are producing chloronic acid, a neurotoxin, before entering into the brain that may account for the secondary injury observed in aged individuals. And circadian clock disruption through genetic ablation of BMAL and disruption through chronic jet lag impacts the metabolism of these immune cells. So this led to my general hypothesis, which is that the disrupted circadian clock in aging impairs immune cell metabolism, leading to a maladaptive function, which is evident in many age-related diseases, including stroke. So in my future studies, I really want to understand what circadian regulated mechanisms change as we age, and how can we manipulate these mechanisms to reduce the maladaptive immune responses that are associated with aging and disease. So for my first direction, I'll investigate the circadian regulation of metabolism in immune cells in young and aged mice. This goal is very relevant because immune function and inflammation are implicated in many age-related diseases, and the mechanisms are yet to be fully understood. I'll be collecting immune cells every 4 hours for 48 hours from young and aged mice and measure metabolism, gene expression, and inflammatory molecules in order to identify these specific circadian regulated mechanisms that change with age. For my second direction, I'll investigate the effect of circadian clock disruption using the two approaches I discussed earlier, myeloid-specific deletion of BMAL and the chronic jet lag. This aim is relevant to humans given that we engage in social jet lag and shift work, all of which are associated with increased risk for disease. I will use metabolomics, transcriptomics, and Luminex to identify age-specific mechanisms that change in immune cells as a result of circadian disruption. And I will also investigate how this impacts cognitive function. For my third direction, I'll investigate the effect of circadian clock disruption on the immune response to stroke. Using my circadian clock disruption models, I'll subject mice to stroke and then measure metabolism, inflammatory response, and changes in gene transcription. This approach will highlight specific mechanisms with aging as a factor that are further impaired by circadian disruption in the immune response to stroke. And this approach can be applied to many other age-related diseases. And with that, I would like to thank my mentors, Katya Andreasen and Erin Gibson, my collaborators, Melanie McReynolds at Penn State University, everyone in our lab, and my funding sources. Thank you.
Excellent talk. If you haven't already, please put your questions into the Q&A on the Cvent platform. I also wanted to take a moment while the questions are coming in. I apologize for not introducing you earlier. So I'm going to take this time to do that. So Dr. Chineri is a postdoctoral fellow in the Andreessen Lab within the Department of Neurology at Stanford School of Medicine. During her postdoctoral training, Dr. Wika determined that loss of the circadian clock protein BMAL1 in microglia impairs hippocampal synaptic plasticity, accelerates age-related cognitive decline, and disrupts the sleep-wake cycle by a mechanism involving defective synaptic pruning by microglia. I got it right this time. So as we heard, Dr. Owika's future research is focused on understanding the circadian regulation of immune function and metabolism in aging and disease. So I see we have a question by Swati. Great talk. I'm wondering if you looked at age-related changes in circadian disruptions in both male and female mice. If not, would you suspect similar changes in both sexes?
Definitely. That is one of my future directions, is to look at gender differences. There are differences in circadian rhythmicity in terms of the liver. That's where a lot of the work has been done. There are age-related, gender-related differences in the circadian rhythmicity of many of these clock machinery. So that is definitely something I would like to look at in the future.
I have a question. Maybe I can ask. Great talk again. Have you also looked into the microbiome, for example? What are the external factors that might be contributing to this changes with age?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was actually talking to another investigator yesterday about looking at circadian rhythms of gut permeability. So as we age, our gut becomes more permeable, and we leak a lot of things into the systemic circulation. And that's primarily one of the reasons why you see this activation from the gut, releasing these pathogen-associated molecular patterns that I indicated in my talk, that will activate the immune cells that then cause them to go into the brain as well. So you have a double hit from the brain and the gut. So that will be something that I have not looked into, but I strongly believe it is implicated and something I would like to investigate in the future.
Good.
Awesome. We have one more from Corey. Excellent talk. Dr. Owika, do you know if there are regions of the brain that are more inclined to metabolic changes due to circadian rhythm disruption?
That's a great question, and nobody has actually looked at that. I would think that maybe possibly the hippocampus, because it is where we consolidate memory, but that would be something to really investigate. Circadian rhythmicity it's not new, but is gaining a lot of traction, and I'm hoping that a lot of investigators will become interested and will, go on this journey together. But yeah, that's something I'm not sure of, and I don't think anyone has looked at that.
Another question. Great talk. I may have missed this, but does this disruption affect response to infection? From Avery.
Oh, yes, definitely. So there are studies that have done this in mice where they disrupted the circadian clock and then exposed the mice to LPS, which is a protein or factor from bacteria. And it really led to increased mortality in the mice. So yes, it does change the immune response when the circadian clock is disrupted.
Thank you. I think, are there any other questions? Let's give a moment. Okay, if not, thank you again, Dr. Chineri. Up next, we have Dr. Colwyn Headley from Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Colwyn is a postdoctoral fellow in the Tau Lab within Stanford University's Cardiovascular Institute. Dr. Headley is combining his long-term interest in aging-associated mitochondrial dysfunction and immunity with Dr. Tau's veteran expertise in cardiovascular disease to uncover novel perspectives within the immune cardiovascular axis. And today they will be talking to us about building the case for mitochondrial transplantation as an immune booster in the elderly.
Thank you. First, I'd like to really thank the organizers and the ISFS selection committee for this incredible opportunity. My talk is titled Building the Case for Mitochondrial Transplantation. I mean, just like she mentioned. And the work I'm really sharing today is a prelude to the kind of research or research questions that I'd like to my future lab to focus on. So I'm going to start off with using an analogy because it's about the immune system. Sometimes it can be a little complex. so if you can imagine that your immune system is a car, then a young or healthy immune system is kind of like it's like a new whip. It's got great gas mileage. The brakes work well. You can weather the storm. You're going to survive a car crash. Now, as you get older, the longer you drive, the less functional that car becomes. And an aged or immune system kind of looks like unfortunately looks like a clunker. You've got high mileage, horrible brakes, and you might not make it if you get in an accident. And so I'm really interested in understanding why the car or the immune system gets to this point, and if there's anything I can do to salvage or repair it. And so the data that you'll see today really pertains to CD4 T cells, which are an immune cell that really bridges communication between innate and adaptive arms of the immune system. And a T cell or CD4 T cells is similar to a car in the sense that you need a key and a driver to turn it on or activate it. And after it gets activated, or turned on, it will express certain markers of activation. It's going to produce cytokines, and it's going to proliferate. Typically, when you compare a young CD4 T cell to an old CD4 T cell responding to the same antigen or key, the older T cell does not display the same levels of activation markers. They don't produce the same amount of cytokines, and it tends to be biased towards pro-inflammation, and they don't proliferate to the same magnitude. And so over the last decade or so, it's become pretty clear that the integrity of the engine or the integrity of mitochondria influences all aspects of T cell function. And another consequence of aging is that there's an increase in mitochondrial dysfunction. And so typically when there's engine failure, in real life, when there's engine failure, there are other symptoms or kind of things that go wrong with the car. And so sometimes you see a lot more smoke coming out from the exhaust. And so with cells, it's a similar process where they tend to produce a lot more reactive oxygen species, and principally coming from mitochondria. And so it's often a sign of increased levels of mitochondrial ROS is often a sign of dysfunction. And this is really supported with the data that I have here, which is really showing that when you measure mitochondrial ROS in CD4 T cells from young and old mice, regardless of their resting or activated status, the older T cells have significantly higher levels of mitochondrial ROS. So in real life, you can take your car to a mechanic and it might be able to salvage the engine or put a new engine in there, and it's going to extend the lifetime of your car. And so I've been using this framework or analogy to look at mitochondrial dysfunction in T cells. And my overall question is that if I can deliver better engines to the T cell, will it function better? And that's really what my hypothesis was, is that the delivery of healthy mitochondria or mitotransfer will improve the function of CD4 T cells. And so after some optimizations, I adapted a protocol to isolate healthy mitochondria from fibroblasts. And then I mixed them with T cells in a microcentrifuge. Then based off the literature, it suggested that a simple centrifugation would be enough to deliver the cells, to deliver the mitochondria to the CD4 T cells. And that's what I did. But just to confirm that this was actually true, I demoed the experiment with GFP tagged mitochondria, and then did confocal microscopy. And from the confocal images, you can see that the GFP mitochondria are localized to the cytoplasm of the CD4 T cells, which is pretty much showing that the centrifugation works. So after that, I went back and looked at I went back and measured the levels of ROS in the old CD4 T cells after mitochondrial transplantation. And what was evident was that there was a significant decrease in mitochondrial ROS in the old CD4 T cells, indicative that it might have changed the level of dysfunction, the level of mitochondrial dysfunction in the CD4 T cells. And so what I did is I did some follow-up experiments to sort of confirm these changes in mitochondrial, health. And I'll share some of the proteomic and bioenergetic data. And so first, the proteomic data. So what you're seeing here in this heat map is the proteins associated with mitochondrial processes, and the groups correspond to CD4 T cells that did not get any mitochondria, and then the ones that did. And it's kind of obvious that a lot of the mitochondrial proteins were increased in the O+ mito group. I performed gene ontology analysis on those upregulated proteins, and these were some of the most enriched terms. And if you pay attention to the most significantly enriched, they were related to mitochondrial ultrastructure. So I followed this up by looking at, by performing transmission electron microscopy. And as you can see from the images, there's a quite evident difference in the cristae ultrastructure in the CD4 T cells that received mitochondria. And so I'll follow up with the bioenergetics data. Chinwe did a great job in introducing the concept, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But long story short, the seahorse is a glorified oxygen meter and pH sensor, and so depending on the assay that you do, you can get information about glycolysis, or you can get information about the basal or maximum respiration or oxygen consumption from mitochondria or glycolysis from the cell. And so that's what I did. The data is really comparing old CD4 T cells and then CD4 T cells that received mitochondria. So from glycolysis, what we saw was that there was an increase in glycolysis. And since glycolysis fuels OXPHOS, we kind of anticipated an increase in OXPHOS, and that's exactly what we saw. Both the basal respiration and maximum respiration potential of the CD4 T cells were increased after mitochondrial transplantation. So just to recap, I'm showing here that there's improved metabolism, there's decreased mitochondrial ROS production that's concurrent with improved metabolism, and there's a change in cristae architecture. So overall, the data is kind of suggesting that the engine in the T cell is running a lot better than before. So my next question was, does this mitotransfer actually improve T cell function? And so we looked at, first we looked at activation markers. And so CD69 and CD25 are two of those markers that get, that pop up on the T cells after they've been, after they're activated. And when you compare old CD4 versus the old CD4 plus mito groups, you see that the old plus mito group had a lot more double positive CD69, CD25 activated T cells. When we looked at cytokine production, we specifically looked at, or at least the data here is specifically showing IL-2, which is a cytokine super important for activation and proliferation. And the literature is, it's pretty well known that IL-2 production goes down with aging. As you can see here by the ELISpot assay, so one dot represents a cell or a CD4 T cell that's producing IL-2. And it's pretty evident that you've got a lot more dots on the right than you have on the left, suggesting that there's improved IL-2 production in the group of cells that received the mitochondrial transplantation. And finally, when we looked at proliferation by the EDU assay, which is really a thymidine analog that gets synthesized into newly incorporated DNA, it's a sort of indicative of proliferation in T cells. We see that there are a lot more EDU positive CD4 T cells after activation. So all of this data is ex vivo, and it's really suggesting, and I'll summarize it, what I'm showing is that old CD4 T cells have a lot more mitochondrial ROS in them, suggesting that there's mitochondrial dysfunction. I was able to isolate healthy mitochondria from fibroblasts and deliver them to these old CD4 T cells. And then this had an impact on the ability of these T cells to activate. It had an impact on the ability of cells to produce cytokines, and it had an impact on the ability of these cells to proliferate. So again, this was all ex vivo. So the next question became, does this mitotransfer improve CD4 T cell responses in vivo? And for this question, what I did is I specifically isolated naive CD4 T cells from mice, which are known to be wonky. And one group got mitochondria, and then the other group got not just vibes. And then they were adaptively transferred into RAG knockout mice. So RAG knockout mice lack an adaptive immune response. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to challenge them with two different pathogens, a viral and a non-viral pathogen, to see how that are known to require an adaptive immune response to fight the pathogen, to see how the cells would work. And so I'll show and so for influenza, we looked at mortality, and for MTB, we looked at the mycobacterial burden in the lung and spleen. And so I'll start with the influenza data first. What was pretty evident was that the RAG knockout mice that received the old plus mito naive CD4 T cells had a longer survivability compared to RAG knockout mice that received the old T cells without any manipulation. And we also had a group of mice as a control that received no T cells at all, just to see what what their survivability was like. For the tuberculosis studies, what we saw, or what I saw, was that similar to influenza, the mice that received the O plus mito naive CD4 T cells had lower bacterial burden in microbacterial burden in their lung and spleen. So it's suggesting that these mitotransfer CD4 T cells are better protective against pathogens as compared to old CD4 T cells that haven't received any mitochondria. And so my future research interest is really in understanding, it's really understand the mechanism by which mitochondrial transplantation helps to rescue the function of AIDS cells. And this kind of also includes looking at different delivery methods. So, I mean, mitocentrifugation is one way, but there are other ways such as encapsulation or even bioengineering mitochondria for in vivo delivery. Some of my, I guess, future or early experiments include looking at whether I can translate this from mice to humans. And so some of the early studies have shown already that, some of my early data already shows that if I have CD4 T cells from older humans and I deliver mitochondria to them, there's a decrease in mitochondrial ROS and the basal levels of mitochondrial ROS. And then if I activate these aged T cells, human T cells, there's improved activation. So I'd like to continue and follow this up and see what else is innovated in the human T cells. Another thing that I noticed from the proteomic data that I collected is that when I filtered for proteins associated with aging or senescence, there was a drastic change in protein expression, suggesting that, and I think it's suggesting that this procedure has an impact on immune senescence, or at least it could be beneficial in reduce. It might be a simple way to reduce immune cell senescence. Another thing that also noticed was that a lot of conserved signaling pathways were impacted by the mitotransfer. And to me, this kind of suggests that similar innovations can be achieved in other cell types. And to that extent, I'm interested in expanding distal cells of the cardiovascular system, since a lot of immune cells and the same immune cells, within different cardiovascular disease, there's innovation by the same immune cells. And so I believe that same immune and vascular cells. And so I believe that this technique could be beneficial in helping treat cardiovascular disease in the aging population. And again, because you can't put humans in a centrifuge, at least not ethically, I guess I'm interested in investigating ways to to have targeted delivery of mitochondria in vivo. And so that to me kind of suggests that I'll be bioengineering mitochondria for that purpose. And with that, I would like to give credit to, it takes a village. And so I'd like to acknowledge everyone that's had a role or hand in developing this project. There's also a link for the preprint or the paper that was recently accepted, but I don't have the citation yet, so here's a preprint. And I will take any questions.
Thank you for a wonderful talk, Dr. Headley. If anyone has any questions, please type them into the Q&A.
Great talk. I'll get us started while people are still writing their questions. Were you surprised to see that no CD4 cells and CD4 cell in the influenza and MTB model that you tested, that no CD4s and old mito were very similar, and there was practically no difference between the survival, and also especially in the case of influenza, and also how does that compare to a healthy mito? Because you have the old and a healthy mito from an old person, but how does it compare to a healthy adult? Do you have any ideas on that?
So let me just repeat your question. So you're asking if I was, I guess, surprised that the rag-knockout mice that received no T cells versus the old CD4, why they were so similar. Yeah, it was kind of surprising. I mean, I anticipated somewhat of a, it's well characterized that aging impacts T cell function and that they're a little wonky, but I was not expecting to see no significant difference between these groups. But what was surprising was how much better the mitotransfer group survived. And then the same thing with tuberculosis. But again, from theory, because mitochondria influence everything as far as the T cells go, then it kind of makes sense to see why the improvements occurred. And then what was the other part of your question?
The other part was that have you compared it to healthy adult? Like, for example, here it is old CD4 mito from, I guess, like the healthy mitochondria from the old person. But have you compared to a healthy adult, like adult or a younger mito?
Right. So I'll clarify by saying that the mitochondria came from mitochondria came from young or healthy cells. I guess you're asking if I've compared old plus mito versus young cells.
Mm-hmm. Sort of.
Not entirely, but it's in the future.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Stephanie. Coco, this is fantastic, fascinating research. It would be really interesting to investigate this for cell therapy products. We isolate and engineer T cells ex vivo and then infuse them back into patients for cancer or infectious disease treatment. Do you have a comment on that?
I think you should send me an email because it sounds really interesting. I'm more than happy to give my perspective, and I suspect that again because from looking at and again I haven't shown a lot of data due to time, but looking at pathways of exhaustion from the proteomic data, we also see some changes there. So I suspect that this has broad implications not only for T cells but other immune cells, especially because they can be taken out and put back in, like you said.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any other questions? If so, please type them into the Q&A. Okay. Oh, there is one. All right. So from Argiana. Lovely talk. Have you tested transferring old versus young mito to old CD4 T cells?
I haven't tested transferring old mitochondria. Well, I mean, let's look at it this way. Would you go to McDonald's if you're trying to lose weight? I don't think that's what you do. But I anticipate that if you were to put old mitochondria into old T cell, you'd have worse impact. What I have done is I've transplanted rotenone and antimycin sort of treated mitochondria into old T cells, and it actually exacerbates dysfunction. So, a great question.
All right, we have a couple more. So from Ahmad, great talk. Are there differences in fibroblast versus T cell mitochondria in terms of the proteome? More generally, are there cell-specific aspects to mitochondrial function?
So great question. My perspective, and from what I've read in the literature, is that mitochondria conform to the environment that they're in, right? And so I'm not transferring nuclear mitochondrial content, just mitochondrial DNA really. So ultimately, I don't think it really matters. I think the quality of mitochondrial DNA that's being transplanted into the T cells is really what's staying long-term. Mitochondria go through, they go through this fusion and fragmentation depending on their metabolic cues. And so I don't expect the transferred mitochondria themselves to be sticking around longer. I expect the mitochondrial DNA content that's being delivered to the cells to stick around longer. Great question.
And one more from Nicole. Thank you for your amazing talk. I have long-term access question for you. How do you see this panning out in the clinic for aging patients on limited income and restricted insurance plans?
That's a great question. So as far as making this economically feasible, I guess like therapy solution, first we have to figure out a way to harvest or isolate or grow, manufacture large amounts of mitochondria. And then the issue with, so you can take immune cells out and then you can put them back, but what if you wanted to do in vivo delivery, right? And that's the one of the, I guess, bottlenecks in the field right now is figuring out ways to have targeted in vivo delivery of mitochondria. And to that extent, I have some ideas, and I'm more than happy to talk to you later about them. So essentially to make like a tagging system where you can actually just have surface receptors tagged to mitochondria and have them delivered to specific cells in vivo. So these experiments, that actual isolation of mitochondria and transplantation are not, I don't think they're exactly expensive. So that from a price point, I think it should be feasible.
Thank you, Dr. Headley. So now we'll move on to Maria Fernanda Forney from Yale University. Dr. Maria is a postdoctoral fellow in the Horsley Lab at Yale University, specializing in how aging impacts metabolism and how that derails the process of wound healing. She's also interested in how caloric restriction can rescue aging. Dr. Forney's overarching goal is to understand how what we eat informs the self-renewal, function, and differentiation of our cells, and how that changes with aging, in the hopes of someday finding solutions and interventions that will allow for longer life and health spans. Today, they will be talking to us about metabolic regulation of cell fate and function in mammalian skin, implications for tissue homeostasis, and aging.
So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the selection committee, because I'm very honored to be here and show a little bit of what I have been doing here at Yale in the lab of Valerie Horsley. And I would like to start saying that 2,000 years ago, Aristotle already knew that like what you eat is what you are. And what he didn't know is that actually the processes involved in how metabolism regulates the biogenesis of whole organisms are extremely complicated, and they involve reactions of anabolism in which we construct macromolecules and catabolism in which we actually break down these molecules to generate mainly building blocks for the cells and also energy. What he couldn't fathom as well is how these processes are interrelated, and more importantly, how everything that is considered a cell function is related to this process. When we think about cell proliferation, differentiation, and transformation, we can think that all of these processes involve biosynthesis of lipids for biosynthesis of plasma membrane and organelles, and a large increase in their proteome to actually remodel their function. Not only this, but if we think about secretion, signaling, and even cytoskeleton and structure, we can boil these processes down to biosynthesis of proteins. And not only this, but even transcription regulation that is coupled to the process of methylation and acetylation is dependent on the pool of metabolites, such as acetyl groups and methyl groups. So everything in the cell can be related to metabolism and regulated by it. That's what actually caused me to be in love with this topic. So my overarching goals as a scientist is try to understand how does metabolism regulate cell fate and function? How does this process is derailed in aging? And is it possible to rewire this for better aging? So a little bit of my trajectory, I'm actually a biologist, and I started working with metabolism when I did my undergrad studies in plants and with metabolism. And after that, my thesis as an undergraduate was with cancer. But during my PhD, I really fell in love with the model system of skin. This is such a great model. And what I found out during my PhD is that as we age, the skin stem cells, they accumulate stem cells that have impaired phenotypes. And not only this, that mitochondrial dynamics, which is extremely important for the metabolism in the cell, can actually inform the cells what is going to be their cell fate. And when I started my postdoc, I keep on doing the same line of research, but I now am working with also caloric restriction, and I was able to show previously that this process completely rewires the process of aging in the skin. And here at Yale with my Pew Fellowship, I have been more interested in the process of wound healing. And more specifically, I'm asking myself, how does metabolism regulate cell fate and function in wound beds in the mammalian skin? And is this process impacted by aging, and how? So I tackled this problem through 3 different initiatives and projects. I won't have time to show you guys, but we use this very cool technique of single cell secretomics to identify that inflammatory molecules can actually act also to inform the metabolism in the wound bed. I also explore the metabolic crosstalk between different cells in the wound bed, especially between adipocytes and immune cells, and that's what we'll be talking about in a second. And very generously, Valerie, my advisor, she allowed me to also pursue my passion for trying to rewire the process of aging. And with that, I started studying how caloric restriction rescue aging in the skin using spatial transcriptomics and metabolomics. But let's talk a little bit more about the crosstalk in the wound bed. So we use a model of full thickness 4 millimeters punches in the mouse back skin to induce the wound healing. And this process actually causes a completely deorganization of the tissue. So all the vasculature involved in bringing nutrients to the skin is completely destroyed by the wound itself. And that actually leads to the release of inflammatory cytokines and histamines that will ultimately lead to the recruitment of immune cells, in the case of wound healing in the skin, monocytes from the bone marrow. These cells, they arrive in the skin and they differentiate into macrophages, but these poor cells, they are differentiating in a scenario in which it's pretty much like a desert metabolically, because all the nutrients that were arriving in the skin, they are completely gone because now you don't have vasculature anymore. But if the cells are resilient and they manage to differentiate into macrophages, the macrophages are going to organize the immune response. And with that, you will have resolution of the wounding and completely healed tissue. That doesn't happen during aging, in which we have stalled wound beds that remain on the inflammatory phase and are a very important public health problem. But what exactly happens during aging in the skin? So this is the ultrastructure of the mammalian skin in young mice, and we can observe that these mice, they actually have a very thick layer of dermal white adipose tissue comprised of adipocytes. And with aging, not only this cell layer shrinks, but the capacity of these adipocytes to undergo lipolysis, which is the process of mobilizing fatty acids for beta oxidation, completely diminishes. I'm not going to be talking about this, but the process of caloric restriction can completely rescue that. But what exactly do we know about adipocytes and the wound bed? We and other groups found out that these cells that are proficient in actually storing and releasing fatty acids that are metabolic precursors, they completely lose their fat and they become myofibroblasts expressing markers such as collagen and SMA. Not only this, but when we use a model of the diphtheria toxin receptor under the control of the adiponectin promoter to completely ablate the cells from the wound bed, we have here depicted, we can see that the process of revascularization here depicted as CD31 endothelial cells is completely gone. And more interestingly, the immune cells that are invading this tissue, they now cannot differentiate anymore. They get stalled as monocytes, but they don't generate macrophages. So with that, we hypothesize that because the wound bed is such a dire place for the cells to differentiate, maybe these fatty acids derived from the skin adipocytes could fuel monocyte to macrophage differentiation during wound healing, and that could be derailed during aging. So the first step to actually ask that was to actually see how these lipids are being transferred between cells. And to our surprise, we could observe that these adipocytes were actually producing extracellular vesicles that were laid with lipid droplets inside of them. And that actually increases hugely during wound healing. Not only this, but we used a lineage tracing model of TD tomato and HFP to actually make all the adipocytes in the skin have EGFP tagged into their plasma membrane. And just to inform you all, when the cells secrete extracellular vesicles, you have a cape of plasma membrane around it. And with that, we were able to trace down that pretty much all the extracellular vesicles in the wound bed were generated in the adipocytes. Not only this, but we were able to show by doing untargeted lipidomics that the extracellular vesicle profile of lipids really resembles the one of the adipocytes. And very curiously, the content of lipids inside of these vesicles changes with time and is derailed during aging. But not only this, but we really wanted to try to understand, okay, these monocytes appear to be uptaking these extracellular vesicles and using them metabolically. But what if they are doing so, what is the main energetic substrate for their differentiation? So in order to do that, we used a methodology of untargeted and targeted metabolomics, and we were able to find out that not only mitochondrial intermediates, but lipid intermediates were important for the process of differentiation. And not only this, but as our previous talk before, we used oxygen consumption rates as a proxy for mitochondrial function. And we saw that the process of differentiation increases the oxidative phosphorylation. And when we ablate the usage of lipids by inhibiting CPT1 with etomoxir, we could not see a differentiation or increase in the rewriting of the metabolism. Not only this, but I won't have time to show you, but we proved that the process of differentiation does not occur in the absence of adipocytes, in the absence of the capacity of lipolysis in these adipocytes, and in the absence of the capacity of the immune cells to use lipids in beta oxidation. But what exactly happens during aging? We saw that in aged adipocytes, these cells are not able to produce extracellular vesicles laden with lipids. And more importantly, when we expose young monocytes to these vesicles, they are incapable to rewire their metabolism for increased oxygen consumptions. And with that, we actually asked ourselves, okay, so if the main difference is in the adipocytes, can we actually rescue aged wound beds by injecting young extracellular vesicles? So I used old mice and I injected young and old extracellular vesicles, and through a process of tissue clearance and confocal microscopy, I will be showing you guys a bird's eye view of the wound bed. So in magenta, we can see here depicted this puncta that are the macrophages, and yellow are the vesicles, the old vesicles. So you guys can appreciate, and here, sorry, is actually the wound, the hole from the full thickness punch. And you guys can appreciate that here I'm being actually generous because we have full areas that are not populated macrophages, but the ones that are very interspersed. But when we use old mice and inject them with young extracellular vesicles, then we have a full recovery of the process of monocyte to macrophage differentiation, showing that these metabolites that these extracellular vesicles are carrying around are very important for the process. So I hope that I was able to show you that adipocytes can actually send extracellular vesicles with lipid droplets that are encapsulated by monocytes and used by them to undergo differentiation, and that this process is impaired by aging. But what exactly is next? I have been telling you all how are the processes that are involved with aging and how they are important for the homeostasis and the impact of this diminished self-renewal and increased senescence. But we already know by a very beautiful study from McKay in 1935, less than 100 years ago, that caloric restriction is able to actually completely rewire this process, increasing not only health span, but also lifespan. And that's what I have been focusing lately, and that's what I'm gonna take with me to my lab when I become an independent researcher. My main approach is actually to try to develop a methodology in which we are going to correlate the metabolic status in the tissue in vivo without disturbance of dissociation in the tissue. In order to do so, what I did was actually to generate spatial, spatial transcriptomic maps of the skin with their different populations. And we are coupling this to spatial metabolomics so that you can actually track down for the different populations of the skin, what is actually there being metabolized and what are the different metabolic pathways that are being present. So that's pretty much the readout that you can have. You have different populations and you can not only understand what's being transcribed and really characterize the cell types, but you can also see their metabolome in a non-disturbant manner. With that, I hope that in the Fernie lab, I will accomplish to understand how metabolism regulates cell fate and function during development, homeostasis, and disease. And I hope that with that, I will be empowered to actually ask more interesting questions, such as what are the metabolic pathways associated with the embryonic development of the skin? How do these pathways contribute to self-renew and differentiation of stem cells and other cells in this compartment? And more importantly, during aging, what are the main metabolic changes that occur with the passing of time? How do these contribute to the development of age-associated disease such as inflammation, frailty, psoriasis, and cancer? And maybe even more interestingly, can we actually rescue these chronic events of loss of homeostasis and maybe develop therapies with what we learned for better aging? And with that, I hope that my research program will unveil very basic aspects of the metabolic control of mammalian cell fate and function, and will pave the way for developing strategies to promote healthy aging and prevent age-related disease. With that, I want to thank my mentor, Valerie Horsley. She has been absolutely outstanding. My path here since I arrived in the US has been very bumpy, from buildings catching fire to disease to COVID, to a lot of different struggles. She was always by my side and empowered me to pursue my dreams. I also have amazing students such as Ting Shu, Will Krause, and now Anthony, Gabri, and everyone in the lab, all our collaborators that are amazing, and our funding agencies. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fournier. If anyone has questions, please put them in the Q&A. It really sounds like you had quite a start. Yeah, so let's give them a moment to put in any questions.
That was really great. To get us started, I'll just ask a quick question. I was curious about what metabolites are there in the EVs that you think might be contributing to this phenotype.
Yeah, so what we were able to determine so far is that inside of the EVs, you have the lipid droplets, right? So the idea is that these EVs, they are just kind of carrying around the smaller lipid droplets that are actually incorporated by the monocytes, and they are using those fatty acids to fuel their metabolism towards differentiation. We think that there's more, but right now, like what we were able to show being transferred is the lipid droplets.
Were you able to do some mass spec on those EVs, to identify any other features?
Yes. So as I showed, I have done like the lipidomics profile to show that, and that actually is very curious because that actually changes with the progression of the wound. That's something that we were actually not expecting, because it shows a very huge degree of control of the cells, right? So we had like this first idea that the adipocytes, they were just like bursting all of these lipid droplets in the wound bed milieu to actually provide the environment, like with energetic resources and building blocks as well, right, for the cells. But this apparently seems to be a very tightly regulated process, because the profile of what's inside in terms of lipids actually changes over time as the wound heals. And what exactly is the impact of that for, like other cells in the wound bed that will be actually acquiring these extracellular vesicles in later moments, we are actually not approaching right now, but it's a very interesting question, very good question.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Guillaume. Do you think that your findings have implications for developing topical therapeutics to accelerate wound healing, particularly in aged cohorts?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm a basic biologist, so I always keep saying that. Thank you so much for reminding me. I think that actually poses like a huge opportunity, right? Because once we are able to actually rescue those chronic wounds in vivo, and again, let's just remind that actually this was just done only in mice, and what we are evaluating is just in like the differentiation of macrophages and the process of, I haven't showed, but we are also evaluating revascularization, reepithelialization, and scar-free tissue. But in the future, I think that would be an amazing strategy to actually tackle this huge problem, because in elderly, you have like a very huge burden in elderly people of chronic wounds that don't actually heal. So if somehow we can actually deliver topically a solution to treat this condition, it would be absolutely amazing.
We have another question from Lydia. Amazing and inspiring work, Maria. Do you have any clues so far on regulatory changes, so gene expression and signal transduction in young versus old adipocytes that change wound healing capacity?
That's an absolutely amazing question, and thank you, Lydia. I know that like we already talked about like collaborating when we get our labs. This is such a great question because the fact that the profile of the lipids being actually targeted and addressed to the extracellular vesicles being changing over time, right, tells me that this process is not a random process as we first thought. It's a very tightly regulated. And how does that actually changes over aging on a adipocyte perspective? We haven't done so far, but I think it with with our new methodology, we will be able to actually answer what are the differences, not only in transcription, but also in unbothered metabolome over aging. So I'm really curious to kind of actually explore that in the future. Thank you so much. Very good question.
And another question from Tigist. What an awesome talk. Can you comment on how high-fat diet alters wound healing in the context of your work?
That's also an amazing, amazing question. So actually, when I arrived in the lab, we had this hypothesis that, that high-fat diet, because it would, provide more lipid substrate, right, for the cells, would actually help with wound healing. And in the meantime, when I started this, my project, there was actually 2 papers that came out showing that actually what happens is a little bit more complicated because it's not only having fat in the adipocytes, but also the type of fatty acids that the cells present that is important. So actually, having a high-fat diet or in obese mice, you actually don't have better wounding, because I think that what's important is actually what is getting targeted to the extracellular vesicles and not only the capacity to have more stored, right? What matters is how much you can actually distribute in the tissue. Thank you so much. Very good question.
Thank you again, Dr. Fourni. We're going to move on to Dr. Fabienne Morales Polanco from Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Fabienne Polanco is a postdoctoral scholar in the Friedman Lab at Stanford University, specializing in proteostasis and eukaryotic cells. His focus lies in translation, clearance mechanisms, and their implications for health and disease. Dedicated to scientific communication and mentorship, Fabienne strives to inspire students' enthusiasm for scientific inquiry while advancing proteostasis research for the betterment of human health. Today, they'll be talking to us about nuclear and cytoplasmic spatial protein quality control and how it is coordinated at nuclear vacuolar junctions.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I would like to say thanks so much for this great opportunity to be here. I'm very honored for the opportunity. And I'm going to tell you, as she said, a story about how cells deal with misfolded proteins. It's not aging itself, but it's very important. When we age, cells tend to misfold proteins more frequently. But before that, I would like to say that we scientists, we usually understand the complexity of cellular biochemistry, but doing experiments in a tube. We perform experiments, we get conclusions about mechanisms, and then we think that more or less we understand the cellular biochemistry. But this is not necessarily the case when we try to understand the same phenomena in the context of the cell. Here, for instance, we have a division of the ribosome from the bottom, in which we see the exit tunnel by which nascent proteins emerge. And as you can see here, there are very dynamic interactions with factors that engage nascent chains, which makes the situation a lot more complicated if we take in account that the cell is a very crowded place. This cartoon is very well known. And in here, again, we see ribosomes with nascent proteins that being emerging from them, but then they are already interacting with their surroundings. We have other proteins, lipids, DNA, sugars, membranes, etc. So all these processes are very difficult to take place. And now we know this even better with the advent of higher resolution techniques like cryo-electron tomography, in which again we see the molecular crowding taking place in the cell. So how actually all these biochemical pathways take place in the cell. And I became very interested in this kind of question during my PhD, in which I described the glycolytic mRNAs, meaning the transcripts that were encoding for the metabolic pathways of the glycolysis, were colocalizing in actively translated cytoplasmic RNA granules in yeast and in mammalian cells. And as you can see here, the mRNAs were not like this randomly distributed in the cytoplasm. They were like coalescing, and the degree of colocalization was more or less between 50 and 75%, and indicative that there was some sort of regulation in the synthesis of these the enzymes of this very important metabolic pathway. So we named these granules like coffee granules by core fermentation granules that were facilitating fermentation in yeast. And then we think that they are like translation factories, or like a space in the cytoplasm in which we can eventually concentrate chaperones and other factors that facilitate the synthesis of these highly expressed proteins. So in the Friedman lab during my postdoc, I expanded this notion into the entire cell cycle of the protein from the moment in which the protein is translated. And co-translational factors like folding and assembly, meaning how the nascent chains start acquiring their unique 3D structure from the moment of translation. But not only translation, but also what happens when a protein misfolds in the cytoplasm. How do they reach at the state of terminal aggregation, and how the cell clears these terminally aggregated proteins. So the question that I have as a scientist, like, it goes mostly in like, are all these processes actually spatially organized in the cell? And as I said, I have been working in different aspects of translation, the translation factories, but also in spatial protein quality control. And today I want to say very briefly that I have been studying this phenomena, doing different techniques, particularly yeast genetics and molecular biology, time-resolved light microscopy, super resolution microscopy, and spatial multiomics like proteomics, APEX2 proximity labeling, and local ribosome profiling. And I have been working in these two aspects, and these papers are already published, so we can talk about them later. But the purpose of today's presentation is like a recent project that I have recently published, which talks about misfolded proteins and how the cell compartmentalizes them for clearance. So the cell has three main pathways for clearance of misfolded proteins. We have the proteasome, but also the autophagy pathway. And the third one is like especially sequestered misfolded proteins for the fate or like the decision taking of how the cell is going to actually deal with these misfolded proteins. And in yeast, it has been described different PQC compartment or inclusions. And for instance, here we have a yeast cell, and when a protein misfolds in the cytoplasm, this protein can take different routes depending on the nature of the protein. If the protein is terminally aggregated, like prions or amyloid-like proteins, they are going to form an inclusion that we know as iPod, like in insoluble protein deposit. But there are other instances in which misfolded proteins are not yet terminally aggregated. And these proteins are routed to these dynamic Q bodies that coalesce in a juxtanuclear compartment that is like the juxtanuclear quality control compartment that we're going to call junk. Nevertheless, in the nucleus, it has been described the existence of only one unique inclusion in which misfolded proteins accumulated, the INC, or the intranuclear quality control compartment. So in this project, we wanted to firstly recapitulate the existence of like the formation of these inclusions. In order to do that, we made use of a temperature-sensitive luciferase that is able to misfold upon heat shock, and we were able to recapitulate the formation of these inclusions. As you can see here, upon misfolding, we were able to observe one unique inclusion in the nucleus, the INC, and two different inclusions in the cytoplasm, the junk and the iPod. So once we knew we could make use of this system, we simply co-expressed both of them at the same time because we wanted to understand if there was some sort of like relationship between nuclear and cytoplasmic spatial protein quality control. And when we co-expressed both of them, we observed very surprisingly that once the inclusions were formed individually, after more or less half an hour, very quickly they were homing to the same spot. And as you can see here, it seems to be that they are like homing to the same position or kissing each other across the nuclear envelope. And this became even more evident when we perform particle tracking analysis, in which again we see misfolded proteins forming these inclusions independently to remain together all throughout the course of the experiment. So we were like wondering if we were like in some sort of like a subcellular organization that were bringing misfolded proteins from the nucleus and the cytoplasm to the same position, eventually for clearance. So we performed a higher resolution technique, which is soft X-ray tomography at UCSF in the lab of Caroline Larabel. And we were able to generate these very beautiful 3D reconstructions in which we were able to see misfolded proteins in the context of the organelles, mitochondria, vacuole, and other organelles. But what caught our attention was this, that we were able to observe these invaginations at the surface of the vacuole. This is like the junk, the cytoplasmic misfolded proteins, and indicative of eventual potentially vacuolar engulfment. But also we noticed that the junk was coming to this position, was like always very close to the nuclear vacuolar junctions, which are like these Velcro-like structures that maintain the nucleus and the vacuole in proximity, and is formed by these two Velcro-like proteins, MAC8 in the vacuole side and MBJ1 in the nuclear side. When we went to observe at higher resolution as well what was going on with the ink or the intranuclear quality control compartment, we were able to corroborate the proximity of this inclusion with the nucleolus. But again, we noticed a proximity with the nuclear vacuolar junctions. We further corroborated this, generating these 3D reconstructions in structural illumination. And what it called our attention was that the junction was not only like in proximity, but also was kind of like providing like some sort of like nest for nuclear misfolded protein. And more impressively, what we noticed as well is that in some cells, we were able to see these misfolded proteins being squeezed through the junction. It's like the junction was providing like a gate for misfolded proteins to be routed inside of the vacuole. But again, we didn't have directly evidence that these proteins, cytoplasmic and nuclear misfolded proteins, were coming to the same spot for clearance. So we wanted to directly assess the vacuolar engulfment. So we simply made live imaging experiments. In here, we have a wild type cell with a live cell vacuolar dye M464. And what we can see is that nuclear misfolded proteins, upon compartmentalization, they home, they come to the proximity of the vacuole and they clear at the surface of the vacuole. And we were able to recapitulate this finding using KEMA, which is a pH-sensitive protein that changes its absorption spectra. And here is like very evidently noticed in how we see chunks of misfolded proteins changing in pH environment, again, an indicative of vacuolar clearance. So at this time, everything was indicating that proteins were coming to the same spot for clearance at the vacuole. So mechanistically, we wanted to understand what was bringing them there and how it was happening. So the very first experiment we performed was simply eliminating the junction. And what we noticed is that when we don't have the junction, a higher percentage of cells have these inclusions. But not only that, if we repeat the experiments that I just showed before, it seems to be that the inclusion in the nucleus is trying to tether the surface of the vacuole, but it's not able to do so. So an indication that probably the junction is also providing the place in which the inclusion needs to be routed inside of the vacuole. But this was not the only phenotype that we noticed. There were other instances in which pieces of nuclear misfolded proteins were wrongly targeted to the cytoplasm. As you can see here, we have tiny pieces of nuclear misfolded proteins being targeted wrongly to the cytoplasm. So very briefly, I want to mention today that mechanistically, it seems to be that the perinuclear SCARE machinery is involved in all this process. And as you can see here, when we delete 3 of the members of this pathway, we lose the homing, meaning inclusions, they don't come to the same spot anymore. And then again, we notice chunks of nuclear misfolded proteins going into the vacuole and also being bad from the nuclear envelope. As you see here, we were able to notice some instances of these misfolded proteins being covered by a piece of membrane. Finally, the last member of this pathway is BPS4, which is a perinuclear SCR protein that provides energy and seals all the process. And very surprisingly, when we repeated the live imaging experiment, what we noticed is that now, when we have the junction, the ink is able to tether the surface of the vacuole, but as we don't have the energy provider, it seems to be that clearance doesn't simply take place and the inclusion remains attached to it for a longer period of time. So now we have this model already established in which we have the junk and the ink coming to the same spot for clearance on the vacuole, but there are many fates that misfolded proteins, once compartmentalized, can take in this position. Like misfolded proteins can be refolded by chaperones. They can also be targeted to the proteasome as well as in the vacuole. So what is the logic of a spatial protein quality control? Meaning how the cell decides what to do with which substrate or misfolded protein and if they are different or not. So in order to understand this in a more holistic way, I have recently developed a system using APEX2 to monitor the proteomics and how different they are during misfolding in the nucleus and in the cytoplasm. This is a work in preparation, but the most surprisingly finding that I can show you today is that the interactors of the nucleus and the cytoplasm are very specific, and we have only 13 proteins that are shared, mostly chaperones. And just for you to see here, I'm showing to you now the specificity of the specific interactors of the ink, and you can see there are many pathways that seems to be activated in this inclusion, but including like some homing factors that might be indicating how these proteins are coming to the same position. So following this work that I'm doing at the moment, of course, there are many questions that I would like to answer in my own lab, but I want to divide this slide in two. First of all, because I would like to have my lab continuing to trying to understand compartmentalization of the proteostasis pathways in the cell. And in one, it's like, of course, I would like to continue working with spatial protein quality control and what is like the next step, which are the next questions that I would like to answer in my own lab. And they are very diverse. And from the proteomics, I have multiple potential lines of investigations, like what is the homing factor? I can tell you that we think there is a role of the nuclear pore basket, but also the finding that different ubiquitin ligases are also concentrated and particularly compartmentalizing with the misfolded proteins. What is the function of these proteins? But also, when a protein misfolds, what we notice is that other proteins kind of like are also enriched in this kind of foci, and which ones of these are substrates and which ones of them are co-aggregating, affecting or messing up other processes in the cell. And of course, I would like to understand ultrastructurally what happened with the nuclear membranes. But the other part of my lab is going to be the continuation of my PhD work that I mentioned before of RNA granules and translation factories. And I'm showing to you that there is another work in preparation from the Friedman Lab in which I further investigated how proteins of the glycolytic pathway and others are co-translationally assembled in these RNA granules. As you can see here, this is like a ribosome profiling analysis in which we notice that apparently nascent chains of related proteins are facilitating the engagement and the formation of these protein complexes. And again, following this line of investigation, I also have like further work that I would like to generate in my own lab, which are very similar to the ones related with misfolded proteins. Like, again, I would like to understand ultrastructurally if we have like different ribosomes concentrated there and how general these factories are. And also I would like to use the APEX2 system that I was able to make work in the misfolded proteins, now applied to translation factories. And of course, I would like to further expand this into more mechanistic subjects related with translational dynamics and how they are regulated, especially regulated in these compartmentalized phase-separated entities. And with all of that, I would like to acknowledge all the people that made this work possible, particularly Emily Sontag, who is the first author of the paper that I presented today. She's a fantastic PI now at Marquette University. And I also would like to acknowledge Maggie, which is like my friend. She's working with me in the proteomics paper, and of course, my PI and all my collaborators. And with this, I'm more than happy to answer any question you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Polanco.
Yeah.
So yes, if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A on Cvent.
Great talk. We're still waiting on questions. But I'm just curious that what causes, when you're looking at misfolded proteins, what causes them to aggregate? Is it very random, you think, or it's regulated at some point, the aggregation that you see to become into a specific, compartments?
At the beginning, let me see if I understood your question. That's at the beginning of the presentation, I told you that when a protein misfolds in the cell, depending on the nature of misfolding and how severe it is, it's going to be targeted to different kind of compartments that have very different biochemical properties. The misfolding inclusions that I show you today, they are not terminally aggregated. They are like still in a condition in which they can go back, meaning like they are still reversible. There are some other instances, as I said, in prions and also in amyloid-like proteins, like the proteins of Alzheimer's or Huntington disease, in which when they misfold, they aggregate, and these aggregates are very they're like biochemically very astringent. It's very difficult to bring them back, so they are going to always be cleared. But there are other instances in the cell in which the cells still can deal with misfolded proteins, like, and it's going to put all these pathways in the service of the cell survival and fitness maintenance, right? So yeah, so how they come together by chaperones, particularly that chaperones that bind these kind of like misfolded proteins that are not terminally aggregated in different domains. And they create these phase-separated entities that are these inclusions. So it's like a way to concentrate misfolded proteins in a particular position of the cell, compartmentalizing these pathways, right? And then put them away from other parts of the cell, so we can kind of like save other pathways. So we can kind of like ensure the cell is going to keep functioning. And what is interesting about it is that in these inclusions, you have misfolded proteins, but then you have an accumulation of other proteins, like chaperones is going to come there, ubiquitin ligases and other factors are going to be enriched locally in these inclusions. And this is what I mentioned at the end of my presentation that probably was not that clear, which is like, okay, when we have these proteins concentrated in one particular spot, like chaperones, ubiquitin ligases and other factors, and the cell is going to take advantage of this enrichment, targeting other proteins like substrates to make use of these proteins there also for degradation. So this is then like an open question, like, okay, there is this kind of stress happening in the cell, misfolding proteins, we push them away, we isolate them from the rest of the cytoplasm, but let's make some sort of like positive use of them, because we will have a bunch of chaperones and enrichments of proteins that are useful. And then there are proteins that are targeted there, that we call them substrates, potential substrates, right? And we have in the paper in progress that I mentioned at the end, the Apex paper, we have shown that some proteins actually go there to get ubiquitinated for degradation, but they are not misfolded, but they're like, okay, there are a bunch of these proteins here. Let's go here and do something. So it seems to be very complicated when the cell compartmentalize either RNA and also misfolded proteins, because there are a lot of things changing inside of the cell, right? So
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you for the explanation.
yeah.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Polanco. That brings us to the close of the first Fellows Research Talk session, which was focused on aging. It has been our pleasure to moderate today's session, and a big thank you to our fellows and all the attendees for participating. We've learned of the innovative research endeavors of 4 of our fellows. We encourage you to continue this conversation with Dr. Awika, Dr. Headley, Dr. Forney, and Dr. Polanco via the CVent platform, as well as by using the contact information that they provided on the ISFS website and in the symposium program. We will now take a short break, and the next session will start at 12:45 sharp for the Associates Flash Talks. So please attend those Flash Talks if you can. And if you have a moment, also take time to visit the exhibitors page for our partnering institutions. Thank you all again.